Did you know that the more expensive a cigar, the better it is? Did you know that the darker a wrapper for a cigar, the stronger it is? Did you know that cheaper cigars are some of the worst cigars around? I mean, literally the worst that your money could buy. You might be hearing some of those statements and thinking, what the hell is he talking about? None of that is true. And that's exactly my point. Because there are a lot of misconceptions when it comes to cigars and what they're made up of, how they can affect you regarding your health and price points and quality and what's better and what's worse and what's a good cigar, what's a not good cigar, etc., etc. There's a lot of misconceptions about cigars out there. And I'm going to try and clear up a few of them. I'm going to throw some of the more common misconceptions out there, some of them which I kind of already addressed. And we're going to kind of explore some of those misconceptions and what it means to you, the consumer, those who smoke cigars, those who might be interested in smoking cigars, clearing up those misconceptions and, well, flat out lies. So that way maybe you won't be so wary of wanting to try them. Because maybe you have been a little hesitant wanting to try cigars. You haven't tried them yet. Or you've just heard things and you're not quite sure. Well, hopefully this video will help you clear up any of those misconceptions, rumors, myths, legends, lies, and all of that good stuff. So let's go ahead and cue that music and clear the air. Actually, we won't be clearing the air because there'll be smoke in the air, but you get the idea. Anyway. What's up, guys? You're watching Dad Smoking Cigars, presented to you by stogielives.com and, of course, Casa Cuevas cigars, from our Casa to yours. Thank you so much for joining me for another Friday episode. As usual, I try to release a new episode every Friday. There may be some videos in between, and I'm trying to work on getting more content to you guys because I love making these videos and I love hearing you guys' thoughts on them and interacting and all of that fun stuff. So but yeah, here we are, another Friday episode, and breaking what's been the norm, and not doing a review, but kind of doing another cigar topical video, because I kind of like doing these. They're fun, and it's interesting finding out different facts and different things you hear about cigars. What I talked about in the beginning, in the opening of the video, I basically said we're going to talk about some misconceptions. Now, this isn't to be confused or to be seen as a repeat of the video I did some weeks back, which is cigar frequently asked questions or assumptions or things like that. Though I suppose the misconceptions could be kind of lumped into the assumption category, but I'm going to try really hard not to make this a repeat video or just a rehash or recycling of that video, because I do believe the misconceptions kind of take us into a different kind of territory, especially if you are someone who has only been considering or thinking about smoking cigars, you've never actually smoked, or maybe you are a relatively infrequent cigar smoker and you've heard these misconceptions and maybe you've actually bought into some of them. And while there is a grain of truth in some of these misconceptions, the grains tend to be fairly small and not necessarily accurate. They always say that there's a little bit of a truth mixed in with most lies. And while I won't call these complete lies outright, even though I did say it lies in the opening of the video, the fact of the matter is that these are different types of misconceptions that have just been kind of circulated throughout the cigar community over the many years that cigar smoking has been a thing. So a very, 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 very long time. Centuries, you might say. But I'm going to cut to the quick and get to some of these misconceptions. Did a little bit of research earlier today because wasn't quite sure what I was going to do a video on. But when I kind of started thinking about it, I'm like, oh, there's a lot of things that are out there that are misleading and they don't actually give people the information or the education that they need in order to go into cigar smoking with a clear head and not going in there with any of these bogus claims and things like that. Anyways, let's get to it. In case anybody's wondering, I am smoking an Arturo Fuente Gran Reserva, which doesn't really specify which cigar. I do believe this is actually one of the Don Carlos line. Don't know which one. I think it's the number 4. Definitely not the Eye of the Shark, because I've smoked that a couple times. And this is definitely not the Eye of the Shark, but it's still pretty good. Every now and then when I get a chance to smoke an Arturo Fuente, it's always a pleasant experience. And so I'm really happy that I get to smoke this tonight. But that actually gives me a bit of a segue in one of the first misconceptions when it comes to cigars. And that is price point determines quality. So based off of kind of the general idea that the higher the price point, the better the quality, the lower the price point, the lower the quality, that misconception has definitely been applied to cigars. And I can say with 100% confidence that that is not necessarily the case. At least it just depends on which cigar you're talking about. And I could go into a whole bunch of cigar brand names. I'm not really going to do that because I don't feel like it's necessary. So I'll basically tell it like this. You know, at least with the brand that I'm smoking right now, Arturo Fuente is a very well-known cigar brand, one of the heritage brands, if you will, that's been around for over 100 years. The company was started back by Arturo Fuente, obviously, back in 1912, and that is over 100 years of cigar making, and they still remain one of the biggest names in cigars today. I've smoked a number of Arturo Fuente cigars, and I can honestly say that I haven't had a bad experience with Arturo Fuente, but I haven't smoked that many. And who knows, I may end up having a not so great experience with a Fuente cigar at some point. But the point is that this brand, the one that I'm smoking, which will be the only one mentioned, tends to be, depending on which cigar you're talking about, a little bit higher in price point. Especially when you're talking about like the Opus series and things like that, Opus X, anything that is a little bit, even the Don Carlos line tends to be a little bit higher in price point. Now, does that mean that they are the best cigars on the market because they're so expensive, or the best quality and the best tasting? I don't know. And some people might argue that they are. Those who are frequent Fuente smokers will tell you they're the best cigars out there. And you are entitled to that opinion, because if that is what your favorite cigar is to smoke, or favorite cigar brand, then more power to you. But they do tend to be a little bit higher in price, but that doesn't necessarily mean, and this translates to other big name brands, heritage brands as well, that just because they are expensive doesn't mean that they are going to blow your mind, knock your socks off, or that they are the most flavorful, rich cigar that you will ever try in your life. It might be. Then again, it might not be. You might end up shelling out anywhere from 20 to 50 to 70 bucks for a single cigar, which there are cigars out there that expensive and way more. And the risk, the gamble that you take with that, if you're going to spend that much money on a single cigar, is that you may end up being disappointed. Which would be a shame, because if you have that kind of disposable income, it would still be kind of sad, because if you're shelling out that much money for a single cigar and there's a lot of hype around it, it's very popular among people who can afford that kind of price point, there's the risk you may end up disappointed. And I have heard stories of people who did spend a lot of money on a single cigar and ended up kind of sad, because they're like, wow, I spent that much money on a smoke and it wasn't that good, or wasn't as good as advertised. But again, it's incredibly subjective, making the point that just because it has a higher price point doesn't mean it's going to be this absolutely mind-blowing cigar. It might be, it might not be. On the flip side of that, there is also the idea that less expensive cigars, let's just use the price, kind of the bracket of anywhere from 8 to 15 bucks, which 15 bucks is still a decent amount for a single cigar, but it's on the lower end. Even here in California, it's kind of on the lower end of price point, because the tobacco tax in California is ridiculous, as opposed to a state like Arizona, a state I really need to go back to and hang out with some really awesome people that I know and love. The prices for cigars there are much lower. Even some of the more expensive, higher price point cigars are quite a bit less than here in California, because of tobacco tax and other factors that go into the makeup of the price are not as insane. That being said, though, there lower price points on some of these cigars, and some of these cigars, which might be more along the lines of a boutique brand, and you know how much I love boutique brands, and they actually end up being these amazing cigars, little hidden gems that you may never have heard of because maybe you're used to smoking Cubans, or maybe you are used to smoking some of those bigger name brands, heritage brands that you were introduced to when you started smoking cigars, and that's mostly what you smoke. Not a bad thing. But then you end up being introduced to some of these smaller brands that have not yet become household names, and they end up being fantastic. I can't tell you the number of boutique smokes that I've tried that have been so amazing, and then I go back to some of the heritage brands, bigger name brands, and I smoke those and I'm like, wow, these are not as good as I remember, or not as, maybe I haven't tried that particular one. I'm thinking this doesn't really live up to the hype, in my mind anyway. So to sum it all up, just because it has a higher price point doesn't mean it's going to be incredible. It might be, but then again, you might end up disappointed. It just depends. Depends on your personal preference, your palate, and also how much you're able to spend on cigars in a given moment. Some of the lower price points have honestly been some of the best cigars I've ever smoked, and they may very well be the best cigar you've ever smoked up until now. You just got to try them. So, and the nice thing is that they won't set you back too much. Some of the lower price points will surprise you, and they may be your new favorite smoke. You just never know. This next little cigar misconception is kind of interesting when I read about it, because it's not something that I myself ever really thought was true or ever heard was true necessarily. It's not something that was ever put to me in regards to its veracity or anything like that. And that is that the point of origin, meaning where a cigar is manufactured, determines what goes into the cigar. So let's just say the cigar is manufactured in the Dominican Republic. That would mean that it's mainly Dominican tobacco. Not necessarily true. Same thing as if it was made in Nicaragua, which I've said many, many times that Nicaraguan tobacco is some of my favorite tobacco, because the cigars that I've smoked that have had predominantly Nicaraguan tobacco in them, I tend to have really great experiences with them. Now, does that necessarily mean that if it was manufactured in Nicaragua, it's mainly Nicaraguan tobacco? Sometimes, yes, and that's what you call a puro. Same thing in the Dominican. If it was primarily Dominican tobacco, Dominican binder, filler, and wrapper, which those do exist, puros do exist. In Nicaragua and Dominican, I've heard mostly of puros coming from those points of origin. But even if they're manufactured in a specific country and region, that's not necessarily going to mean that they're only made with tobaccos from that country and region. There are manufacturers who purchase tobacco from all over, depending on where the tobacco is sourced and who they go through to get their tobacco, etc. There are a number of places, plantations, where they grow their own tobacco, but they also source tobacco from other areas. They may have someone they know who ages their tobacco a certain way, or it's aged a certain amount of time, and they want to use that in their new upcoming blend, or they want to test it on a new blend. It doesn't necessarily matter where the cigars are manufactured. There will be some of that local regional tobacco used. Yes, a lot of the time that's what happens, but not primarily. They're going to use tobacco from other countries. They're going to use tobacco from other regions, because what you see a lot lately, or what you've seen for many, many years, is that a lot of these master blenders are doing just that. They're blending different types of tobacco, or tobacco from different places, testing things out, trying things out, seeing what kind of flavors, aromas, and what kind of experience they're going to get out of it. And the variety is just, there's so much variety out there. There's tobacco that is sourced from here in the United States. There's tobacco that's sourced from Central and South America, different countries like the ones I previously mentioned, including Costa Rica. And then there's even Colombian tobacco used. There's tobacco from Africa that is used, the Cameroon tobacco that is pretty popular. And if I'm not mistaken, if this is a Don Carlos cigar, then it has a Cameroon wrapper. I have tried cigars with Cameroon wrappers. They are delicious. They provide an altogether different experience than, say, a Connecticut broadleaf wrapper, or a Maduro or Habano wrapper. It just depends, and every country and region has something different to offer. And that's the wonderful thing about these different places that produce different kinds of tobacco. The soil, the minerals in the soil that are, more familiar to that region, it does something to the tobacco that makes it a little bit different. And it provides the variety that we enjoy smoking on a regular basis. So, yeah, a long way around the barn, which is what I usually do. Just because it's manufactured in a certain country doesn't mean that country's tobacco is primarily used. It's used a lot, yes, but not always. So, don't know if that was a misconception you'd ever heard of yourself, but I have put it to rest. That is not necessarily true. Kind of touching on makeup of cigar, another misconception that tends to float around the cigar community is that the darker the wrapper, the bolder the cigar, or the lighter the wrapper, the milder the cigar. Definitely not true necessarily. Now, there are a number of dark leaf wrapper cigars, Maduros, and the like that I've tried that kicked my ass. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it was the wrapper that kicked my ass. It was what the cigar was made up of as a whole. The binder, the filler. It could have been a blend of these crazy tobaccos or just crazy blend that was put together that packed a huge punch that made the cigar as strong as it was. Full-bodied, full-flavored, and bam, a kick in the face, but in the good way. Just because it has a dark wrapper doesn't mean it's going to be very strong. Then again, because it has a light wrapper doesn't mean it's going to be very mild. I've had some Connecticut cigars that brought the spice, were a little bit on the stronger side, and as opposed to a mild profile, it was a medium plus profile. I have tried cigars that were the color of my coffee after I put my creamer in it. It is like a light cream colored wrapper, and yet when I smoked it, it ended up being way stronger than I was anticipating. And it's kind of maybe you take a sip of a whiskey or a certain mixed drink. You don't expect it to be very strong based off of what you were told or based off what the bottle says. But then you take a sip and you're like, whoa, that is strong. Holy crap. I've smoked some pretty mellow Maduro and Habano cigars. Then again, I've smoked some what might be perceived as milder cigars, and they ended up throwing me for a loop. It's kind of nuts. It just depends on what else is in the cigar, the blend of the filler, the binder combined with the wrapper. The wrapper doesn't dictate the strength, adds to the experience, of course, because of the complete makeup of the cigar. So you just never know, because you could get a cigar that's relatively dark like this one. I'm not sure if this is a Don Carlos, because I tried to find out. I was doing quite a bit of research based off of the band and the cedar wrapper that was around the bottom of the cigar. It looked a lot like the Don Carlos line, but I don't know. And if I'm not mistaken, they use a Cameroon wrapper in that line. But in any case, it's still very good. It's a darker wrapper, but it doesn't feel like it's got a whole lot of strength to it, a whole lot of bite to it. But I'm enjoying it. It just depends on the complete makeup of the cigar. The wrapper doesn't really dictate the strength. It kind of gives an air of boldness and richness to the flavor, and a lot of times that is very true. But doesn't necessarily dictate that the strength is going to be pow, in the face. It may be very mild. You could have it in the morning with your coffee, and it won't really affect you in the negative, because sometimes strong cigars can upset the stomach depending on whether or not you've eaten and things like that, so you got to be careful. There are cigars that will knock you flat on your butt, so just beware and do your research, and don't believe the stereotypes or, as I've said, misconceptions about what cigars actually are and how they will, and what kind of experience you're going to get out of it. I think I'm going to close off on this one, because I think this one's actually a very common misconception that a lot of people have heard at some point in their life, whether you are actually a cigar smoker or not. And I remember it was back barely a year after I tried my first cigar. I went to go see a fun little action movie based off of a comic book called Hellboy, starring Ron Perlman. Now, anybody who knows anything about Ron Perlman is that he is an avid cigar smoker. But the cool thing about the role that he played, the role of Hellboy, the half-human, half-demon superhero, is that Hellboy loves to smoke cigars. So Ron Perlman must have been having a hell of a time when he was making this movie. Well, at one point in the movie, he rescues a colleague who works with him at this, Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense, if anybody follows Hellboy. And anyways, he saves his colleague, who at first neither of them liked each other very much, but they kind of come to respect each other. And this colleague is played by Jeffrey Tambor. If you guys have watched Arrested Development or anything like that, you know who that is. And Jeffrey Tambor, his character, is also a cigar smoker. Anyways, Hellboy finishes taking out this bad guy, rescuing his colleague, and decides to light up a cigar in celebration. But his lighter's not quite, lighting up, doesn't seem to be any fluid left. And Jeffrey Tambor kind of says, "What the hell's the matter with you? You never light a cigar with a lighter, you use a wooden match. Helps preserve the flavor." And Hellboy kind of puffs on a cigar after it gets lit by Mr. Tambor, and he kind of is like, "Huh, thank you." Like as if to say, "I never realized that before, and I'm going to do this from now on." Now, honestly, back in the day, way back in the day, all there were matches to light cigars. There were no lighters that had been invented or manufactured yet. So matches were the way to go, and no one knew any better. But obviously, technology advanced. We have lighters, and we use them frequently to smoke our cigars. And then I would say within the last 20 to 40 years, the torch lighters came into the picture, using butane as opposed to lighter fluid. And there are people who argue till you blue in the face, like, the only way to light a cigar is with a match, preserves the flavor more naturally, la 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 la. And then, people who are kind of on the side of the, are on the lighter train, they're like, oh, well, if you're going to use a lighter, make sure you only use a butane lighter because it's a pure fuel and it won't mess with the flavor of the cigar. Most people can't seem to agree on that, really, because if you want to light your cigars with a match, light your cigars with a match. If it changes the flavor profile or keeps the flavor profile a certain way, in a way that you'll enjoy them, that's what you should do. If you prefer to use a lighter, use a lighter. It honestly doesn't matter. At least from my vantage point, I tend to use a butane lighter just because for me it's easier. I kind of suck at lighting matches, and I never can seem to get a good toast, and then I gotta toss it, light another one, toss it, light another one. It takes me forever to light because I'm kind of ridiculous with a match. No problem using a match to light my pipe, but when it comes to lighting a cigar, I kind of suck with matches, so I stick with a lighter. But not everyone's really fond of lighters. They think that it messes with the flavor of the cigar. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Honestly, personally, I cannot tell the difference because I've done both. It just mostly equates to the fact that I'm kind of just a dork with matches because I can't seem to keep, even with the really long matches, I can't seem to toast it very well or light it very well, and it just kind of delays the experience altogether, and I'm afraid I'm going to accidentally burn my finger, burn way too much of the cigar, and it's just like I'd rather not mess with that and just go with the lighter, because personally that's my preference. And it honestly doesn't matter. If you want to light your cigar with a match, light your cigar with the match if that's what you like. If you want to light your cigar with a torch or soft flame lighter, do that. I would recommend using butane as opposed to lighter fluid because I have noticed, I remember I used to light my cigars with a Bic lighter and I got chewed out by a couple people for that. But I did notice a little bit of a difference between using a Bic lighter with lighter fluid as opposed to a butane lighter. But then again, maybe it's all in my head. I don't know. I use a lighter. It's what I like. Leave me alone. And I'll leave you alone. Unless you want to hang out and smoke, then we can totally talk. But anyway. But those are just a few of the misconceptions that float around the cigar community about, smoking cigars, obviously, and what goes into cigars and how you enjoy them and stuff like that. So there's so much misinformation floating around. There's so many different opinions that float around, and no one can ever completely agree on this, that, or the other. So it all just depends on your preference. It all depends on what you like to do or how you like to enjoy cigars. The price point you enjoy. If you can afford more expensive cigars, you buy more expensive cigars. Nothing wrong with that. Same thing as nothing being wrong with enjoying cigars that are a little bit lower in price point. You never know what you're going to end up getting. You may end up getting this incredible hidden gem. Then again, you may pay top dollar and not get a great experience at all, and you may end up regretting that. Hopefully it doesn't break your bank, and hopefully you just enjoy it altogether, because that's the purpose of smoking cigars, is to relax, enjoy, and, well, reflect. Maybe. I don't know if that's what you do when you smoke. I do that often when I smoke, and it's very nice. So anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed this video. And yeah, if you know of any misconceptions that like you heard for years, or something somebody told you, maybe you're just now getting into cigars and you might have one of those, hey, I heard someone say this, is this true? Go ahead and put them down there in the comments and we can have a discussion. But other than that, guys, thanks for joining me. I appreciate all of you. Thank you for your support, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one. Hey guys, thanks again for tuning into this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and also follow Dad Smoking Cigars on dads_smoking_cigars on Instagram, and be sure to check us out on Facebook. Until then, guys, stay smoky, and I'll see you in the next one.